Welcome to The Poetry Joint, a podcast about poets, poems, and poetics. My name, Stephan Donahue. I have a scant knowledge of poetry, and that is the starting point for this podcast, to see what I can learn.
There's a light on in the attic. I can see it from the outside, and I know you're on the inside. Looking out.
Exploring good poetry, bad poetry, sonnets, couplets, ballads, rhyme, no rhyme, grand verse, silly verse, concrete poetry, liquid poetry, words with meaning, words without meaning, old poets, young poets, radical poets, ancient poets, contemporary poets, confessional poets.
Angel-headed hipsters, burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night.
The Poetry Joint. Hang out. See where we go. An island country of rift valleys, steaming geysers, bubbling hot springs, rhyolite mountains, sprawling lava fields, sweeping glaciers, shifting tectonic plates, tabletop mountains, active lava-filled volcanoes, roaring waterfalls. A little below the Arctic Circle, the island waters are a combination of polar currents and the warm Gulf Stream, filled with rich fish stocks as well as orca, humpback, minke, sperm, and blue whales. Iceland. Iceland, first inhabited a little over 1,000 years ago by Viking explorers and settlers. The Icelandic language of today reflects very much the Old Norse language of 1,000 years ago. Some of the first writing in Iceland codified early sagas handed down from the traditional storytelling of the original Viking settlers. Embedded in the epic sagas were poems and verse. To this day, Iceland has a strong literary heritage. Even modern pop culture has examples of Icelandic language being used in song.
Ég bý við sjóinn og á nóttunni þá kafa ég niður alveg á hafsbotninn.
An excerpt from Akeri, the Anchor Song by Björk. Translation roughly, I live by the ocean, and during the night I dive into it, down to the bottom, underneath all currents, and drop my anchor. This is where I'm staying. This is my home. Björk, her name in Icelandic, refers to the iconic native tree of Iceland, the birch tree. The Writers Guild of Alberta presents the Stephan D. Stephansson Award for Poetry annually. The winner in 2022 was Rayanne Haynes for the collection Tell the Birds Your Body Is Not a Gun. Past winners include the inaugural winner, John White in 1983, Roberta Rees in 1993, Wayman Chan in 2003, Marilyn Dumont in 2018, and many others. Most, I must confess, I'm not familiar with, and I certainly didn't know who this poetry award was named after. Stephan D. Stephansson? This episode of The Poetry Joint will explore Alberta's connection with Iceland through this poet. One of the most prolific of Icelandic writers, he wrote the majority of his work not in Iceland, but in Alberta. Born in 1853 in the north of Iceland, his life journey would take him first to the USA, then to settle in Alberta, then called the Northwest Territories, where he and his family homesteaded along the Medicine River. Their homestead farmhouse near present-day Markerville is an Alberta Provincial Historic Site. There is a website which has some information on this poet, writer, and farmer. There was this translation by Christiana Gunners of an excerpt from a letter he wrote in 1906 to his friend and editor Egert Johansson. Stephansson wrote, "I started farming many years ago. At that time my only tools were an axe and a shovel, and I had 75 cents in my pocket. This has improved. There are many more tools, and the cash may be more or less. What is hard is having the urge to write with no tools to work with. No essential reference books to aid the memory, no modern literature to indicate what the trends are. And it's regrettable at times to have to rush out and work, just as poems are raining into one's head, good ideas one wants to use while they are fresh. They have to be grabbed when they come, but circumstances don't permit it." So, knowing little about the Poetry Award, about the poet, or even the historic site that was here in Alberta, I set out to learn a little bit more, and I was fortunate to contact Calgarian Moorea Gray. Moorea has written extensively on Stephan D. Stephansson, been involved with the StephanDStephansson.com website and with Stephansson House, and maintaining contact with his relatives to this day. So let's find out a little bit more about Moorea and her knowledge of Stephan D. Stephansson.
I've always been interested in literature, writing, and reading. I went back to university when my kids went to school, when they were old enough to go to school, and I have a Bachelor of Education, but then I went back and got a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature and also a Master of Arts in English Literature. So yeah, I would have to say going back to university as an adult really got me interested in poetry.
And fortunately, I've been able to link up with you, who seems to have a pretty comprehensive knowledge of this poet and his place in Alberta and Icelandic history as a writer and a poet. How did you come across Stephan D. Stephansson?
I'm a member of the Writers Guild of Alberta, and there was an advertisement for a call to write a memoir, and it sounded interesting to me, and I had the time to help this person out. And it happened to be Steve Benedictson, who is the grandson of Stephan D. Stephansson, and he wanted me to write a memoir of his mother, Rosa, who is the poet's daughter. And so I got involved with that. I edited and published. We had this memoir published, but in the process I learned all about Stephansson, the poet, and went up to Markerville where his home was, and his house still stands. I just kind of took off with the whole Icelandic literature, specifically with Stephan D. Stephansson. And what I felt was that there were various translations of his works out there, about 80 or so, but they weren't all in a single anthology, and you really had to hunt them down. And so I said to Steve Benedictson, this needs to be done, an anthology needs to be created. And so I've been to Iceland 4 times, becoming more familiar with the culture and the people and literature, and I've joined the Leif Erikson Icelandic Club of Calgary, and I have no Icelandic blood at all, but I've totally been immersed in this Icelandic culture, which is fantastic. And the Leif Erikson Club in Calgary is great. And they're putting on a big conference in May at the Banff Center. It just skyrocketed out of a call at the Writers Guild of Alberta.
I haven't been to the site at Markerville, although I understand it includes the farmhouse where Stephan D. Stephansson wrote and homesteaded, and it also incorporates the surrounding Icelandic community to some extent.
It's a great site. They've his house still stands. It's called the Stephansson House, and it has the little den, which would be uncommon back in the early 1900s for a farmhouse to have a dedicated little writing den. There's that, and there's the creamery, which he helped establish. They've just opened the Buttermaker's House. There's a hall, the Lutheran Church. It's a great little community, which is still very Icelandic.
What were the factors that drove the Icelandic immigration?
Around 1870, 1890, there was a big exodus. There was illness in the sheep. The land wasn't very good. And I don't have the numbers with me, but they did. There was a big exodus that the immigrants left and came to the U.S. and then started working their way up into Canada. And there's a large, strong community in Gimli, Manitoba, and as well as in Victoria. They are spread out, but I would say Gimli is probably the largest community in Canada, and then we've got Markerville here in Alberta.
I guess to return to the poet of the episode, what drove Stephan D. Stefansson's writing talents and desires and ideas, motivation?
And with Stephansson, in the mid-1800s, growing up in Iceland, he was part of a very poor peasant family, but it wasn't unusual for farmers and these families to be very literate. They would read the Bible over and over again. Stephansson had wrote that one summer he read the Bible 4 times. And then there would be manuscripts that would be circulating. Perhaps there was a wealthy farmer or someone from Reykjavik that would have some books, and those books or manuscripts would start circulating. And what's interesting is not only would people read them, they would then copy them so that they would have their own editions of that book. In 1827, Sir Walter Scott published a history of Napoleon Bonaparte, which was then translated into Danish. And then in 1832, an Icelandic farmhand began copying the Danish translation, turned it into Icelandic, and ended with 3 volumes of Scott's work in Icelandic. So they beg, borrow, and steal any kind of literature that they could get their hands on and start circulating it and learning from it. And another interesting point is that the Icelandic language has not changed really since I think it's the 10th or 13th century. And so those who can read can go back to the sagas and read what was written way back then.
I guess in some ways working with such an ancient and archaic language makes it hard to interpret it into modern English, which seems to change every year.
Absolutely. He had such great command of the Icelandic language and a great understanding of traditional Icelandic poetic forms. a great translator. Her name is Christiana Gunner. She's Icelandic Canadian. I believe she still lives on the West Coast. She was a translator, writer, academic, and artist. And she does have a very good book of translations called Stephan D, Stephansson Selected Prose and Poetry. And she writes, a translator of Stephansson has every reason to be hesitant. He is a difficult poet. His command of Icelandic was exceptional, but he used the language in unique and often esoteric ways. He mixed genres and styles and moods within individual works, and he subverted and complicated word order. He frequently made up new words to express eclectic juxtaposition. A skilled ironist, he played with tone until a poem could be read in opposition to itself. He was an obscurantist who delighted in double and triple entendres, yet he was also passionate and direct, not one to mince words. Carrying over into English all these simultaneous qualities is for the translator a challenge.
In many ways, Stephan D. Stephansson was a product of his time, where free thinkers were challenging many of the conventional ideas about religion, politics, and democracy. Is that fair to say?
He wrote, his poems covered nature, the immigrant-emigrant experience, community, hard work, but he was also known for his pacifist poetry and his atheist poetry. And that actually, a lot of his works he sent back to Iceland because he was concerned that they would be censored here. He left the church. He was tired of those who felt they were self-important and the hypocrisy of the church at the time. And he was a real strong supporter of women's rights. And he found that the church did not support women's votes or many of their rights. And Stephansson was a doer, and he didn't have time for arguments, gossip, and finger-pointing. So one of his poems, it's a little epigram. It's called God Under a Magnifying Glass. It's just 4 lines long. He writes, I quite expect that very soon I'll weary of this fussing, how holy men are splitting hairs when God they keep discussing.
Moorea Gray has written extensively on Stephansson, a fine essay on the Emerson College website, which probably goes into more detail than we'll be able to get to in this episode. We need to remember also that in addition to being a poet, he was a family man and a homesteader in the early 1900s, working long hours of manual labor to earn a living for himself and his family. Perhaps Moorea can give us another poem of his.
All righty. The poem is called Little Helper, and it's different than many of his other poems in that it's a playful poem. It's not so serious as his other poems, but it definitely looks at the playfulness of nature and the beauty of nature, but also the hardships that the farmer endures. And it was written in 1896, and it is translated by a fellow named Sigurdur Wappenford, who was a Canadian, and I quite like his translations. And I do wonder if is it Stefansson's mood and playfulness that I'm enjoying, or is it Wappenford's translation that I'm enjoying? Mm-hmm. But I'm sure it's both. So it's called Little Helper. Run out to the pasture and fetch my gray, I said to the lass, and don't delay. Light as the deer, she was on her way, but she didn't return, she didn't obey. I counted the minutes, impatiently stern, reflecting on law and order, and on order in turn. To punish the guilty became an obsession, pompous and righteous, a synod in session. She finally brought the horse to my side. I grabbed the lead from her hand, I was snide, and said, "You'll be punished, young lady, tonight. tardy and careless. You deserve such a plight. She was startled, as if she had done something wrong. Oh, sunrise, why did you delay me so long? I let down my guard. I scoffed and spat. I sneered and said to her, how was that? Well, she said, when the sun shines so bright, whatever I see is a wondrous sight. It seems like the dew is all silver and gold. Great clouds of sea mist the valleys enfold. Like a fleet of black ships that sail in the sky are the stark mountain peaks, and standing nearby, all the tops of the spruce bluffs are visible too. They look like great rocks in an ocean of blue. The copse over yonder is a sight to be seen, all laced with fine netting, so shining and clean. The swallows were diving and swooping with glee round the schoolhouse gable and roof, you see. This must be a swallow festival day, since they're all allowed to go out and play. I didn't hear any more, she said. I patted the hairs on her curly head. Revenge in my heart had just melted away at the heartfelt child's poet's morning lay.
Yes, a nice little poem. I remember reading in your essay how when the muse would strike Stephan D. Stephansson and he found himself out in the field, he would have to sometimes drop what he was doing and rush back to the house so that he could write down the inspiration that had come to him.
He would do that, and I guess he actually did. He would stop doing what he was doing in the field and run back and write while he had this thought in his mind. And he has these just spectacular letters that have been collected. There's 4 volumes of letters. They're all in Icelandic, but a few have been translated. And he'll say, I'm sorry I wasn't able to write you back. The roof caved in because of the heavy snow, and I've been writing out on my front porch. And so, yes, for him, unfortunately, farming and survival often took the place of the writing that he wanted to do so much.
If I can, I'll read an excerpt from a letter Christiana Gunners had translated. It's from Stephan to Magnus Sigurdsson on his New Year's Eve of 1888. It goes, on the last day of the year, I chopped firewood, herded 40 livestock, and drove 8 miles through the wilderness to my childhood friend who had got it into his head that I absolutely must eat and drink with him that night. Before dawn, I walked home, half sleepy, worn out, and alone like the old year. At the daybreak, the 3 of us stood together on the brow of the hill above our valley. New Year's morning, the blizzard, and I, with 4 more miles to go. How different life was then. Certainly thanks to Moorea for her insights. There are lots of resources out there for you to learn more about this connection between Iceland and Alberta. Iceland itself has a long poetic tradition, early skaldic poetry by warrior poets, the Eddas, which recounted Norse mythology and legends. The winner of the 1955 Nobel Prize for Literature was Iceland's Halldór Laxness, a novelist, essayist, playwright, and poet. He had this to say in his Nobel acceptance speech. He said, "Of that community of 150,000 men and women who form the book-loving nation that we Icelanders are, from the very first, my countrymen have followed my literary career, now criticizing, now praising my work, but hardly ever letting a single word be buried in indifference. Like a sensitive instrument that records every sound, they have reacted with pleasure or displeasure to every word I have written. It is a great good fortune for an author to be born into a nation so steeped in centuries of poetry and literary tradition." From the 1800s, a celebrated literary figure in Iceland is Jonas Hallgrímsson, sometimes referred to as the poet of Icelandic consciousness. He was a geologist, a naturalist, as well as a poet. He was an advocate for Iceland independence from Denmark and a promoter of the Icelandic language. His birthday of November 16th is officially recognized in Iceland as Icelandic Language Day. I went looking for some poetry to hear and get the feel of the Icelandic language itself in verse. I came across a wonderful set of Icelandic poems and its translation in English on the Terrain.org website. Founded in 1997, Terrain.org is an independent magazine of literature, artwork, commentary, and design. Well worth a visit. The article I came across was titled 4 Poems by Magnus Sigurdsson, translated by Meg Matich. Magnus and Meg are Icelandic poets as well as translators. Meg states on her website that her job is in service to words, whether literature or marketing. Magnus is a poet and translator of other works into Icelandic, others like Ezra Pound and Emily Dickinson.
Járn og gúmmí. Kæri járnsnör, þú sem skríður hér milli beðanna í skugga nýútsprunginna blóma. Illa má ég við 7 ára ógæfu þinni. Né mátt þú við allsherjar ógæfu gúmmísólans.
Blacksmith Beetle. You crawl between garden rows and newly upsprung flowers. I can't bear 7 years of your misfortune. Neither can you bear the burden of my rubber soles.
Vatnaskil. Hugarfljótið hefur skolað mér á þurrt. Úr kallfæri, undir nýjum himni, og ég sái í nýjan akur.
Watershed. A flood of thoughts has washed me ashore, out of earshot, beneath a new sky, and now I plant in an untouched field.
Daglilja. Nú glitrar morgunsólin í krónu dagliljunar. Hún sem í senn, brunnur sem fyllist og bikar sem tæmist, hvern nýjan dag.
Daylilies. The morning sun glitters on the crown of a daylily, a wellspring that fills and a cruet that empties each day.
Vetrarhugur. Það hefur gránað í fjöll og haustvindarnir æða nafrir milli húsa. Samt hlakka ég til komandi vetrar. Þegar áin streymir milli skara og raddirnar berast óra vegu í stillunum, milli okkar tveggja, í mánuðinum með járnnafnið, þegar orðin eru eins og kalt stál og það málmbragð milli tanna.
Winter thoughts. The mountain has turned gray, and autumn winds whip sharply between buildings. Yet I look forward to the coming winter, when rivers channel through border ice, and voices carry far away in the stillness between us two, in the months with iron names when words are cold like steel and leave a metallic taste between my teeth.
Blacksmith Beetle, Watershed, Daylilies, Winter Thoughts by Magnus Sigurdsson, translation by Meg Matich from his book Cold Moons. Thanks to Meg, thanks to Magnus, thanks to Moorea for her insight, thanks to Simmons Bunton at Terrain.org. This has been the Poetry Joint. My name's Stephen Donahue. Catch you again in a month's time. Take care.